Let me caution that this is not a paper that ends by saying we must get rid of the internet for it is rotting the brains of its users. Rather, I seek to investigate whether social media interfaces are supplementing our lives, and if not, is it possible to create beneficial social media interfaces to portray our real-life selves? I fear that there is no easy answer to this question. I find that social media categorizes the human interactor as a self-qua user rather than self-qua subject. Rather than creating an interface that prioritizes an expression of a subject that is using an interface, social media prioritizes the commodification of subjects as users. Social media sites are set up to encourage the user to stay online, to continue to consume content or even create content that will be commodified by the site, and to create parasocial relationships with other users through functions like likes and comments. While not inherently problematic, these functions perpetuate the subject as user rather than subject qua subject. Thus, these social media giants reduce a humanistic subject to a mechanistic user. Moreover, likes and comments encourage one-sided and superficial parasocial relationships that are commodified by social media sites through the utilization of influencers and targeted advertisements. I argue that social media lacks humanism in the sense that it is not built to express one's subjecthood, nor build reciprocal relationships. Instead, it is a standard interface that reduces the subject to an online commodity, or in other words, social media is a mechanistic interface based on a commodified user experience that reduces subjects to users. We need to consider how Johanna Drucker's idea of a humanistic interface from her book Graphesis, which is an interface that is meant to expose itself as a system that makes meaning rather than present information, how this can be implemented into social media interfaces to create self-oriented and self-friendly social media sites. I will begin by defining the parasocial relationship and a discussion on how it works in social media. The term was first coined in 1956 by David Horton and R. Richard Wohl when they first discussed it in reference to the relationships people developed with stars in radio, television, and movies, calling it a seeming face-to-face relationship between spectator and performer. It is a one-sided relationship and, according to Horton and Wohl, is a relationship that may be governed by little or no sense of obligation, effort, or responsibility on the part of the spectator, which they acknowledge can be true of other relationships. But a unique aspect of parasocial relationships is that the interactions are one-sided, non-dialectical, controlled by the performer, and not susceptible to mutual development. In their paper on parasocial relationships, Horton and Wohl describe these performers as personae, which I will argue that social media influencers and content creators now play that role. Horton and Wohl describe these figures as people who can claim and achieve intimacy with what is literally crowds of people and strangers, and that the audience seemed to know the figure as they would close friends. The parasocial relationship interactions are encouraged through the media that personae figures are presented. Horton and Wohl go on to say, quote, "When the television pans down on the performer, the illusion is strong that he is enhancing the presumed intimacy by literally coming closer. But the personae's image, while partial, contrived, and penetrated by illusion, is no fantasy or dream. His performance is an objectively perceptible action in which the viewer is implicated imaginatively, but by which he does not imagine." End quote. But the parasocial relationship does not end with the viewer. The actor's self, or in this case, the influencer, is equally affected. According to Walter Benjamin in his essay on technological reproducibility, the actor is exiled and made to feel a void. Quoting Luigi Pirandello, the film actor, Pirandello writes, feels as if exiled not only from the stage but from his own person. With a vague unease, he senses an inexplicable void stemming from the fact that his body has lost substance, that he has been volatilized, stripped of his reality, his life. The little apparatus will play with his shadow before the audience, and he himself must be content to play before the apparatus. Thus, the actor lets go of their true self before the camera to play the role of something other. Benjamin and Pirandello are writing on the shift from stage performance to film performance, and while they are referencing silent film, this sentiment is still applicable to social media and the consequent parasocial relationships seen today through social media. The influencer is reduced to an idealistic self. It is often said that social media often shows the better parts of ourselves, and with influencers, this is likely the case. The commodified user, and equally the commodified influencer, send their likes and comments into the void in which the influencer, or persona, to use Horton and Wall's vocabulary, loses their body and strips their reality, a reality of a self. Influencers post get ready with me or unboxing videos that create a sense of closeness with the viewer. In this content, the creator portrays a relationship with the viewer in which the viewer is seemingly involved in the influencer's life, creating the illusion that the viewer knows them, thus perpetuating the one-sided parasocial relationship. During this interaction, the influencer, the seeming void of a self, is reduced to what is before the viewer. This relationship is destined to exist one-sided. Through social media, there is little room for real interaction between the viewer and the personae. While there is the ability for the influencer to reply to comments from viewers, the surface-level interaction is barely enough to break past one-sidedness. Many of Instagram's features encourage parasocial relationships like liking posts and commenting on influencers' content, which is unlikely seen or noticed by the influencer themselves. Rather than a person, the liker is reduced to a notification in the app. A phantom of a person in the mass notification alerts in the content creators' management team used to increasingly cater to the wants of their persona's fan base. Functions touted as enabling the online self's autonomy and encouraging building online relationships only reduce the person into an impersonal notification and perpetuate the parasocial relationship. The layout of the app and the interactions it encourages all have to do with the interface that Johanna Jucker discusses. In this book, she discusses web design and how its design works to create representation of knowledge and its uses. Jucker concludes by discussing the possibility of humanistic approaches to interface that focus less on the person as user and more on as the interface working for the person. Although there are interfaces everywhere, Drucker discusses the interface theory began with a community focused on the relationship between human and machine into a field known as human-computer interaction, or HCI. This is where Drucker begins her discussion on interface theory as she explains, quote, "The standard theory of interface based on the user experience is reductively mechanistic. Its goal is to design an environment to maximize efficient accomplishment of tasks, whether these are instrumental, analytic, or research-oriented, by individuals who are imagined as autonomous agents whose behaviors can be constrained in a mechanical feedback loop." This is contrary to what she expects a humanistic interface to be, which she describes as an interface that pushes beyond efficient and transparent designs for the organization of behaviors and actions and mobilizes critical networks that expose and call attention to its madeness and construction of knowledge, thus orchestrating a shift from conceptions of interface as things and entities to that of an event space of interpretive activity. Humanistic interface is an interface that exposes itself and allows for interpretation by the one who is using it. Therefore, a humanistic interface would allow the person to do more than just use it, but it would allow for a space to create and express oneself through interpretive media. The humanistic interface strives for more than user-friendly. It revolves around the humanistic subject, which Drucker describes as a subject that leaves a trace on the emerging, mutating environment of an interface. Furthermore, humanistic subjectivity involves the ability of the subject to register a trace of itself in a representational system, and that self-recognition and self-constitution depend on that trace, that capacity to make and register difference. I argue that social media is an interface that relies on the user experience rather than an experience for the subject, as a humanistic interface should do. Thus, a humanistic social media interface should be subject-oriented. The construction of Instagram and the user-friendly internet experience is not one that stresses the constructiveness of knowledge, nor one that exposes madeness. The construction of a user-friendly online experience hinges on the interface's ability to blend in with the user as a profile rather than a person. This could be why spam accounts are so easily created, or the issue of bots. The user-friendly interface is one where a humanistic subject or even personhood is no longer necessary to have an account. Instagram or any social media like it are not subject-oriented in this way either. If it is possible to have bots, then one would assume that the interface does not lend itself to solely subjects. Rather, it is an interface that a non-subject is able to utilize to the detriment of actual subjects. According to Drucker, the HCI user combines two ideological illusions in a single paradoxical identity: the predictability of a mechanistic automaton and the myth of autonomous agency, which I argue is exactly what social media like Instagram aim to do with influencers. An algorithm that feeds the user content works by using the user's likes and online habits to present the user with content they predict they will enjoy. This in turn creates the illusion that the user is autonomously interacting with new content. In reality, the algorithm is doing all the work for them. The algorithm creates a mechanistic user and thus a mechanistic subject in the sense that the user is not an autonomous subject who can pick and choose what content to look at. Instead, the algorithm makes this decision and provides the subject with what content the algorithm assumes they will enjoy or interact with further. Furthermore, the user-oriented construction of social media creates a tendency to keep the user on the app and takes away from real autonomy of the person outside of the app. If I am spending hours at a time scrolling mindlessly, I have less time to spend out in the world. Rather than the interface benefiting ourselves, the app utilizes our faux online autonomy to keep us trapped in the interface. Instagram profits from the time we spend on the app, and the more the user interacts with ads and other content. Social media and online ads' existence is strictly online. Thus, there is no way for them to benefit from us spending time outside of the app. This is certainly a bleak outlook on the status of social media and phone usage, but the point I strive to make is that the technology we think is benefiting ourselves is not doing so in a humanistic way. It is still true that we can use social media to keep up to date with our friends' and relatives' lives, but the fact that my feed is filled with countless ads for commodities or services I may have no real interest in reduces the real benefit of keeping up to date with online relationships. The algorithm that works to predict our habits and create the illusion of our online autonomy is what keeps this user in the mechanical feedback loop that Drucker discusses. Drucker also discusses the cultural component of interface, which is particularly interesting when applied to social media content that often promotes political stances. At least for myself, a lot of my feed and a lot of what my friends are posting is pro-Palestine content. However, another one of my friends' feeds are filled with pro-Israel content. This is based on the algorithm that is predicting our social and political stances based on who we are following and what they are posting, even if we rarely interact with those people. Drucker says, if we look at web-based design, however, the navigation paths, search and query results, browse features, in brief, every aspect of the web content management display, embody values, even if these are largely ignored or treated as transparent or visible. Thus, the interface we interact with often carries our political and cultural stances with it. The interface can perpetuate and further fuel our exposure to certain political and cultural movements, not to mention the ever-growing issue of fake news. Interfaces can control what propaganda is seen by users. Horst Bredekamp quickly discusses the power of images as propaganda in the intro of their book, Image Acts, saying, "Images have always been an effective weapon as symbols of victory, propaganda as indoctrination, and mass media can be used to extend the battlefield from the local to the global." The power of images as propaganda relates to the earlier discussion of advertising qua propaganda. The data that is collected from our interactions with ads helps companies understand who is looking at what propaganda, and by feeding them more of the same content, further perpetuate political issues. As I have argued, the algorithm that provides the subject with content, thus reducing their autonomy, works in tandem with the power of images that Bredekamp discusses. The notion that these images have such power that easily influences the subject provides us with empirical proof that these images are truly powerful. Their ability to influence the subject to buy or continue to create content that the interface will use for its own purposes shows us how the social media interface is not concerned with subjects. The social media interface prioritizes a user that is commodified through this propaganda and advertisements. Drucker insists that a humanistic approach to interface is needed, one that is subject-oriented rather than user-centered, like how the HCI community already designs for. But what would a subject-oriented interface even look like? Drucker goes on to discuss how a subject-oriented interface includes recognition that a point of view system is in place, that a subject enunciates, produces, a constitutive perspective in which she is situated, made, and from which she perceives. But what exactly does this mean? How do we create a space that considers what the subject is perceiving through the screen? What it comes down to is subject over profit. The basic design of interface, as it is now, is primarily for profit. There are ads on almost every website you go on every app you download. A subject becomes a user, which becomes a product. The attention the interface user gives is commodified by companies trying to influence their habits. Drucker sees the interface as a space in which a subject, not a user, is invoked. This means that a humanistic interface is subject, not user-focused. Instead of the interface working to influence the habits and actions of the subject, this humanistic interface should work to be influenced by the subject to adapt to a better experience for the subject using the interface. This brings me to the question, what does humanistic interface look like, and is a humanistic social media interface one that discourages parasocial relationships and encourages more genuine connection? Drucker's idea of a humanistic interface is one that exposes the fact it is made, and a parasocial relationship is not a relationship that is made from true knowledge of the person. It is a relationship made from illusion. The parasocial relationship is likely unavoidable, but at least a humanistic interface could allow for a connection where one could truly communicate with the personae on the other side of the screen. The structure of social media itself is a large part of the issue. One solution could be to shift the interface away from one that allows so easily for the creation of parasocial relationships. And likewise, it should be an interface that doesn't allow for advertisers to get data so easily, or is at least more transparent about what they do with our data. A humanistic interface is one that truly allows for the self qua subject, to use their own autonomy and decide what is most useful for them when engaging with the content. Rather than an interface that predicts your actions for you, for Drucker, the humanistic interface is one that begins to register on the humanistic corpus that contributes to the many streams of cultural material. Incorporating these processes of assessment and reflection has the potential to produce new ways of gauging and engaging with the effective experience of being human. This interface would be one that considers the consequences of its design more thoroughly. It reflects its influence on the subject and should be heavily influenced by the subject. The subject interacting with the interface is no longer the user or the product for these social media sites, but the subject is using the interface for their own benefit. An interface that considers what its users want to see as functions in the interface would be more humanistic than one that implements popular functions in other interfaces. Interfaces that are transparent about their intentions, both in design and function, can benefit the subject because there is no longer mechanization in the subject. Rather, it is the interface itself that is revealed as mechanic, with the subject's autonomy restored in an interface that allows for subject's input, allowing the subject to suggest changes to the interface, making policies more transparent with frequent updates on changes that are taking place, using feedback to improve the interface. The interface can then be considered subject-friendly rather than user-friendly. Thank you.